let's see how to use a directive called vModel, which is especially useful when you work with input elements. It's applicable only for input elements. In fact, it cannot be used in a div, paragraph, image, or something like that. Only for input elements, input type, text, password, select input, checkboxes, input type, checkbox, radio button, text area, all these things it can be used. And essentially, if you're familiar with Angular, it's essentially two-way data binding of Angular and what is called the control components pattern in React. So it helps to maintain the data entered by the user in the input. User will be typing out some data, selecting from a drop down. So in some data variables. So that way you can extract out what the user is typing within the inputs, and you would usually send it to a backend to do further processing. Like when during a login, you'll send username, password, extract it out and send that. So let's see how to do that. We'll be creating a login form for this. We're looking at vModel for two-way data binding, what's called two-way data binding. So again, we're using view 2 here, then we'll check with view 3. Both will be the same. So we'll be creating a form. There might be other things on your page. So whatever the form elements are, the controls are, username and password in this case. For that, we'll create a separate object. So we'll call it credentials. So this is the data object. Within that, we have credentials, again, just encapsulating the data for the login form. That's all we'll have in this example, but otherwise you'll have more properties here or something else. So credentials, we'll be storing the username, what the user enters in the username field here. Initially it'll be empty, so we'll set empty string. Password, again, we'll set it empty. Now we'll have a form. So it's the login form. Sign up or, sorry, sign in or anything you might want to call it. And then we'll have a form. So in this form, we'll be having two fields. One is for the username. We'll give the class MB3. So between this field and next field, there'll be one more div. It will give some margin below. MB is margin below. You have 1, 2, 3, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So 3 is a moderate amount of margins below this. So we'll have one div for we'll have the label. For the label, we'll have the classes. So for the label, we'll have the classes call SM2 and call form label. So call form label is there for every kind of form in Bootstrap. It's to mark the label, the styling for the label. And it's saying call because it's based on the Bootstrap grid system. Even without this as a class, but if you do like this, so it gives, if you're aware of the Bootstrap grid system, there are 12 divisions in a row. So you'll also have to say row here, class row. And 2 out of those 12 divisions are for this label, and 10 will be for the input field. So it will be divided in that ratio, 2 is to 10. So 12 is the total, it should add up to 12, basically. So essentially the input, the width that it gets will be 5 times that of the label, 2 is to 10. So 1 is to 5, basically. It has to add up to 12. Now for the input, we'll put this inside this. It doesn't matter if it's a div or a span actually, because it uses a flexbox layout under the hood. So the display property doesn't matter once you use flexbox. So this row is a flexbox container parent. So we'll use the class call SM10 for this. So 10 plus 2, 12. The full width it will occupy 10 plus 2, 12. 12 is the full width. Now for the input, first thing we should do is we need to give it an ID because it's based on the ID that you associate the label with the input. So let's say username and the for attribute. This is just plain HTML. The label for attribute should be username label. So label for attribute should be set to the ID. So this will also be set to username. Then as a general practice, I'll also set up the name property. This is not necessary really, but in HTML form submissions, browser form submissions, it's actually required so that this data is passed to the backend. It's not really required in Vue and all. So name again, I'll set username. It could be different from the ID, but I'll set the same. So the next thing is what is very important. Of course, we can give the class also for this, for the input. So the class applied for the input is form control in Bootstrap. So it will style it with nice bordering, padding, etc. So also we need to give the type. This is just text. It's not necessary that if it's type text, it's the default. But for the password input, the next one, it will actually be necessary. Type equal to password. For this, it's type text. That's fine. Now, class ID name, I'm missing something. Actually, it's not on the label that you have to set. Sorry, I was wondering. Input type, right? Now, finally, this is where we'll come to the V model. This is a new directive we are saying, V model. And you set it to the data member that needs to sort of control this input. So this input will always show whatever is this data property. So if we see here, if I set to credentials dot username, because you cannot directly set to username. Username is not a property on this. So not like this, right? It's not like this. Not like this. It's within credentials of the data object. So credentials dot username. So now if we see this right now, the path, you can see here it's taking 2:10. This is 5 times the width of this, 2:10, label and input. And you can see this is empty. It's not a coincidence. Basically, it's bound. This input is bound to credentials.username, this one, vmodel, through the vmodel directive. So if you actually mention John or something here, that is what will appear in the username. Refresh and you see John here, right? That's what will appear. And not only that, it's two-way data binding. So the input value is set from the data. Not only that, if the user tries to update this, this is how vmodel works. Of course, it's taken from the data because of the vmodel. But if the user tries to update this, for example, Jonathan, what will happen internally is the data property will also be set. So the event handler is actually set up. When you type it, there's an input event. That's an input event. It actually also changes the data property. Just to see this in action, what we will do, we will actually show this in the UI. We will show here, I'm just showing it, data binding. I'm showing what is the value of credentials.username. Right. Now, if you see the moment we type, it's actually showing it here. Currently, the data property is John, but if you type Jonathan, you can see that here also it's updating internally, it's updating the data as well. So not only is the input influenced by the data, it's showing whatever is the data, credentials, username, but when the user types, that data also updates. So this is why it's called two-way data binding. All right. So now the advantage is the point is we are able to maintain what the user is typing in the data variable. And if you want to reset it also, like you want to clear it out, all you have to say is this dot in some method, event handler, some button click or whatever, this dot username equal to empty string, and it will also reflect it, right? So it's easy to control that input and also get the updated current value. This is like the single source of truth. This data is only what you need to look into, what you need to probe to know what the user has typed in the inputs. So let's repeat the same thing for the password field. So we'll take a copy of this, have it below. Let's say for the password, so we need to update the ID of this to password. Let's also update the use name, which is not required really, but Generally, we do give a name for input, and also this to password label. And this will be bound to the password field. Of course, we don't want to display the password, but just for understanding sake, let's see if it actually updates the credentials password. So password is initially empty, but when we type, you can see that's what I'm typing. Of course, we don't want to show the password here in the input, so we need to change the type to password. So input type password. Again, it's just plain HTML password field. All right, so don't want to show, it doesn't show. That's a oh, my bad. I didn't refresh. It doesn't echo here. Also, now we can remove these. We understand. And we will have a button. We have a button. By default, a button within a form is of type submit, but for clarity, we can still say type submit. A button within a form is always of type submit, but for clarity, we can explicitly say type submit. And button, it's actually having it has a closing tag, unlike input type submit. A button also you can give type input type submit or button type submit. For button, you have actually content will be within the open close tag will be the text within the button. For input type submit, it's of value. So you give it through the value attribute. So button, this is login, we'll say login. Or sign in or whatever. So yeah, you see this, we can also give some styling for this. So class BTN small, BTN BTN primary. All right. So of course you have bootstrap classes to move this and align it with this. All those things you have to skip columns and align it. That's fine. So now we will, maybe you don't want to have this. So we'll also remove that. We understood that. Username will be empty initially. Now, the moment you submit, you want to, let's say, pass this data to the backend. We are not going to see how to do that, pass the data to the backend, but at least we'll read the data and we'll log it in the console for now. So the event that we have to handle is the form submit event. When you click on a form button, a button within a form submit button, the click event fires on the button, on this button, but the submit event fires at the same time on the form. Usually we are interested in the submit event of the form because that allows us to prevent the browser submission. In HTML, the browser itself will gather those input which have name attribute and it will send it to a backend. And the form's action attribute tells which URL the browser has to submit the data to. Usually we don't do this nowadays. We collect the data ourselves and through an AJAX call, through a JavaScript based HTTP request, we send it to the backend. So that is exactly what we'll do. So we will be handling the form submit event because that helps us to prevent the browser submission. So I'll handle the submit event, not the click event of the button. That's generally not done. So at the rate submit, two events are fired, form submit and button click. So submit, and we know how to do event handling. So we'll say login. We don't need to pass any arguments. So this is enough. Of course, if we had to, we'll do this way. So we'll write a method login now. Login. So this method, of course, it receives the event object. So we get it. So when it's called, it'll be passed the event object by view. And here we'll first prevent default. So the browser form submission is prevented. Okay. You can try to comment this if you don't know about browser form submission. You can try to comment this line and see the page will refresh. That's not something you want to do. You just want to send generally the details of the inputs, the for input values through an AJAX request, which will be seen sometime later. So prevent default. And then you know where the credentials are. Of course, we can gather it into an object if you want, or no need also. We'll just console log this dot credentials, right? We have to use this in the context. And that has property. for each data that you're using. So credentials, you're logging this object. So we should see the user inputs in this object. Let's see. Open the console. Username, let's say Jonathan, and password, let's say, a space also. Password. Login. And you have the access to that object, credentials. That's actually a wrapper. It has some getters and setters set based on the properties within the object. This is something to do with the reactivity system of Vue. So how Vue detects changes to data. When you set the data, you know that Vue automatically reevaluates the UI and re-renders. It shows that, right, when you set any data. How it all works is because Vue transforms these objects in a certain way, so it can detect changes to the data members, to the data properties. So if you don't want to see this, you can explicitly gather it into an object. Like you can say credentials. You set the username from credentials.username. Password from credentials password. This is just an object you have created and extracted the values into its properties, username, password. Now we'll log our own credentials object, not the data credentials, but this local credentials object. Again, I'm just in the same. Password I set as password. So when you log in, cannot access credentials before initialization. Okay. What is the mistake I'm doing? Okay, so this is taking the local one, right? My bad. I did the mistake. This dot credentials, this you're extracting from the data credentials. And then you're logging the local credentials object that you create. Username, Jonathan, password. And there we have it. And without those extra things, data setters, which are there in the data property, Vue adds them so that it can detect changes. So that's it. We've seen how to use vModel